There's nothing more devastating than watching your life unravel because of a lie. Imagine this. A man stands alone in an empty courtroom, the weight of the world on his shoulders. His hands shake and every breath feels like it could be his last. The judge is about to deliver a verdict that will alter his future forever. But he never expected this. Not like this. Not now. Let's rewind for a moment. Picture a football stadium packed with thousands of screaming fans chanting his name. Flashbulbs pop, catching the brilliance of his victory. In the locker room, his teammates surround him, lifting him high, celebrating every ounce of his success. He's at the peak of his career, admired and adored by all. But now he's looking at his own mugshot on the evening news. His bank account is drained, his reputation shattered. His name, once known by millions, now means nothing. Every person he trusted has vanished from his life, leaving him with nothing but a bitter memory. He had everything: wealth, fame, love. And then, in the blink of an eye, it was gone. Not because of his actions, but because of someone else's lies. It's like the world suddenly turned its back on him and nothing could bring it back. But here's where things take a twist. 10 years later, the truth couldn't stay hidden any longer. This time, it wasn't a lawyer or a judge delivering the answer. This time, it came with a gun. Before we go further into James Carter's story, take a moment to reflect. What would you do if someone completely destroyed your life? If they took everything from you without anyone believing that you were innocent? That's what happened to James Carter, and the journey he took to make things right is one you won't forget. James Carter was born in Atlanta, Georgia, a place where the summers are long and the sweet tea flows like water. From a young age, he knew life wouldn't be easy. Raised by his mother, Gloria Carter, who worked tirelessly to keep a roof over their heads, James learned early on the value of hard work and sacrifice. Gloria worked 2 jobs, one cleaning offices in downtown Atlanta and another waiting tables at a local diner. But no matter how tired she was, she never missed a moment to lift her son's spirit. Every Sunday they would go to church together, sitting in the front row. Gloria's prayers were simple but powerful. Lord, make my boy better than I ever was. And somehow it felt like God was listening. James wasn't like the other kids in the neighborhood. While they spent their afternoons glued to video games, James was outside running drills, catching footballs, and dreaming of a future that seemed too big for his circumstances. Gloria would often sit at the kitchen table, counting coins to make sure they had enough to get by. James saw it all: the tiredness in his mother's eyes, the sacrifices she made every day. And it didn't sit well with him. He made a promise to himself that he would get out. He would make it not just for himself but for his mother, the woman who had given everything for him. High school was where James began to shine. Football was his escape, his sanctuary. On the field, he was unstoppable. He could outrun anyone, outplay anyone. The crowd roared as he scored touchdown after touchdown, and scouts from big universities took notice. Gloria stood by the sidelines at every game, cheering him on with a pride only a mother could feel. "That's my boy," she'd yell even when the game was far from over. The scholarship offers poured in. Big schools, prestigious coaches, and full-ride offers to every major college. But James chose the one closest to home, the one where he knew his mother could come to every game. "You sure about this, baby?" Gloria asked when James made his decision. "You could go to any school in the country." He hugged her tight. "Mama, home is where you are." College life was a blur of hard work, long practices, and even longer nights studying for exams. But James didn't mind. He was playing the game he loved, and the future he dreamed of was finally within his grasp. He never drank, never partied, and stayed away from the distractions that seemed to consume other athletes. His teammates joked that he was the preacher's son, always focused and always serious. But it wasn't just his love for the game that set him apart. It was his character. Coaches saw something special in him, not just his athleticism but his leadership, his discipline, and the way he treated others. By his senior year, James was a star. He was the one everyone was talking about, the one the NFL scouts couldn't take their eyes off of. And then draft day came. Sitting in a small apartment with Gloria, the phone rang. The voice on the other end was a dream come true. "James Carter, this is Coach Mitchell from the Atlanta Falcons. Son, we'd like to make you our first-round pick." Gloria screamed so loud that the neighbors came running. James collapsed to his knees, tears filling his eyes. All those years of struggle, of Gloria working 2 jobs to support him, of him playing under the hot sun and giving it his all, it had paid off. The contract was huge, more money than Gloria had ever imagined. The first thing James did was buy his mother a house. A big, beautiful house with a porch where she could sit and watch the sunrise. It was the least he could do after everything she had done for him. The next few years were a blur of success. James quickly became a force to be reckoned with in the NFL. In his first season, he shattered rookie records. He made the covers of sports magazines. Kids wore his jersey in school. James stayed humble, never forgetting his roots or the woman who had sacrificed everything for him. But fame, as James would soon learn, brings with it more than just praise. It brings attention. It brings people. And one of those people was Danielle Collins. James Carter never expected to meet someone like Danielle Collins. She was everything he thought he wanted: elegant, smart, and confident. It was at a charity gala in downtown Atlanta, a night meant for the city's elite to come together and raise money for a cause close to their hearts. James had always been more comfortable on the football field than in a tuxedo, but his mother insisted he attend the event. That night, James stood awkwardly by the refreshments trying to blend in. He had never been one for high society events, but when Danielle walked in, he couldn't help but notice her. She was tall, with striking features and an aura of grace that immediately drew his attention. She caught his gaze across the room, and before long, they were talking like they had known each other forever. They discussed everything from his career to her passion for business and philanthropy. It was refreshing to meet someone who wasn't caught up in his fame or status, someone who saw him for who he really was. Their connection felt natural. It didn't take long for their relationship to bloom. Danielle quickly became a fixture in James's life, attending games, sitting in VIP sections, and accompanying him to parties. For the first time, James felt like he had someone who truly understood the pressures of his world. They made a beautiful couple, and the media loved them. Their faces were plastered on magazines, and their relationship became the talk of the town. For a while, everything seemed perfect. Danielle supported him through the ups and downs of his NFL career, and in turn, James was captivated by her ambition. Danielle always pushed him to be more, to think bigger. She encouraged him to expand his brand, get involved in business ventures, and even start his own clothing line. She had big plans for both of them, plans that James hadn't even considered. While he was content focusing on football, Danielle had her sights set on a life of fame, fortune, and influence beyond his athletic career. But as the months passed, James started noticing little things. Danielle's desire for more began to affect their relationship. She didn't like it when James spent time with his family, especially his mother. She started criticizing his connection with Gloria, telling him that his first loyalty should be to her now that they were married. "You're a married man now, James. Your priorities should be different," she would say. The tension grew over time. Danielle's aspirations started to clash with James's more grounded lifestyle. She would suggest reality TV shows, clothing lines, and even a social media brand, while James just wanted to play football and enjoy the quiet moments with his family. The more Danielle pushed for fame and recognition, the more James retreated. Despite their differences, James loved her and he tried to make things work. But the cracks in their relationship were becoming impossible to ignore. Danielle's ambition seemed endless, and as she grew more focused on her own dreams, James felt like he was losing her. She would disappear for days on end, focusing on her career, leaving James to deal with the public spotlight alone. He tried to understand, tried to make her feel heard, but something was missing. The love that once seemed so strong started to feel more like a business partnership. Still, James clung to hope. Maybe things would get better. Maybe the woman he fell for would come back, the woman who once believed in his dreams as much as he did. But deep down, James knew that something had changed. And soon he would learn just how much. It all started like any other night. James had just wrapped up a charity event where he was honored for his community work. The night had been a whirlwind of media attention, handshakes, and congratulatory messages. He wasn't in the mood to celebrate. All he wanted was some peace and quiet. His relationship with Danielle had been strained lately, But tonight, he felt a sense of optimism. Maybe, just maybe, things would get better between them. James returned to his apartment later that night, exhausted. He hadn't expected anything unusual to happen. But when he stepped through the door, he was met with a text message from Danielle. It was short yet strangely vague. "Can we talk?" He felt a pang of unease in his chest. Over the past few weeks, things had been off between them. Arguments over small things, passive-aggressive comments, and an underlying tension that neither of them had been able to address. But this message felt different. The words on the screen seemed to carry a weight, something more than just a simple request for a conversation. Against his better judgment, James agreed. He thought maybe they could clear the air, figure out what was wrong, and salvage their relationship. He didn't know it yet, but this decision would alter his life forever. Danielle asked him to meet her at her apartment. It was late, but he agreed, hoping to resolve whatever had been building between them. When he arrived, Danielle greeted him with a faint smile, her demeanor cold, distant. James tried to start the conversation, but before he could say much, Danielle interrupted. "I need to talk to you about what happened last night," she said, her voice trembling slightly. James felt a chill run through him. "What do you mean?" he asked, his heart racing. Danielle stood up and turned away for a moment, collecting herself. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, she said, I think you hurt me, James. What happened last night, it wasn't okay. I wasn't okay with it." James froze. His mind raced, trying to piece together what she was referring to. They had spent the evening together, shared dinner, and talked about their issues. They hadn't been physical in any way that night, at least not in a way that James could remember. "What are you talking about?" he asked again, confusion and fear creeping into his voice. "We didn't." "I'm going to the police, James," she cut him off, her voice cracking as she turned back to face him. "You hurt me. You raped me." The words hit him like a ton of bricks. His stomach twisted, his mind went blank. He stood there, frozen in disbelief, unable to comprehend what she was saying. No, Danielle. What are you talking about? That's not true." His voice shook as he stepped forward, trying to reach out, to get her to understand that this was all some kind of misunderstanding. But Danielle's face was resolute, her eyes cold. "I'm doing this because I have to. I have to protect myself. You can't just walk away from what you did. You need to be held accountable for your actions, James." Everything in James's mind screamed for him to fight back, to demand the truth, to prove his innocence. But as he looked at Danielle, he saw a woman he once loved, a woman he thought he knew, now turning into a stranger. Her accusations were venomous, her eyes empty of any compassion. "What the hell are you talking about?" he whispered, the reality of the situation starting to hit him like a wave crashing against a shore. "You're lying, Danielle. You're lying." But she wasn't done. "You think this is just going to blow over? That people won't believe me?" she said, her voice rising. "I'm not the one who's going to look like the villain here. You are. And you're going to pay for what you did." James couldn't process the words. His heart pounded in his chest, his throat tightening. This wasn't happening. He hadn't done anything wrong. He had spent his whole life working hard, staying clean, treating others with respect. He had never hurt anyone. But now, the woman he had once trusted, the woman he had married, was accusing him of the worst thing possible. Danielle turned toward the door, heading for the phone. James reached out, but she pushed him away with force. "Don't touch me," she yelled. "You don't deserve to be near me." With shaking hands, she dialed the police, her voice quivering as she reported the incident. James stood there, paralyzed as she spoke to the dispatcher, her words piercing through the thick fog in his brain. He was in shock. He didn't know what to do, what to say, how to fix this. The police arrived shortly after. They took Danielle's statement first, and then they turned to James. He was in disbelief, pleading with them, trying to explain that none of it was true. But in their eyes he saw something else, doubt. A look that made him feel like a criminal already. Hours later, he was sitting in a cold interrogation room, his life beginning to crumble. The media caught wind of the story, and within hours, James Carter, NFL star, beloved athlete, community leader, was plastered all over the news. The accusation spread like wildfire. Social media exploded with posts calling him a monster, questioning his character. His team called an emergency meeting and suspended him indefinitely. Endorsement deals vanished. Sponsors withdrew their support. In the blink of an eye, James had lost everything. His fame, his career, his reputation, all of it gone. His world shattered. The woman he had trusted, the one person he had shared his life with, had turned everything against him. His life, once full of promise, now lay in ruins and no one believed him. James Carter's life, once a beacon of success, had been reduced to ashes in a matter of days. What he had worked his entire life for, his career, his reputation, the trust of his fans and family, was crumbling before his eyes. The NFL suspended him immediately, and the media's onslaught was relentless. His face appeared on every news channel, every tabloid, and every social media feed, but it wasn't the face of the beloved star athlete. It was the face of a man accused of the worst crime imaginable. At first, James couldn't wrap his head around it. The accusations were so outrageous, so far from the man he knew himself to be, that it felt like he was living someone else's nightmare. He kept telling himself, this isn't real. It can't be. But the more he fought to deny the reality, the more it consumed him. The phone calls stopped coming. Text messages from friends and teammates, once a steady stream, dried up. The endorsements that had once flooded his inbox were now replaced with legal notices and letters from his agent, telling him that all deals had been suspended. Sponsors, whom he had worked with for years, publicly distanced themselves from him. He was now a pariah in a world he had once dominated. The worst part, though, was the isolation. James hadn't expected the public to turn on him so quickly, but he had hoped that those who knew him, his friends, family, and colleagues, would stand by him. Instead, he found himself abandoned. The calls from his teammates stopped. No one from his football team reached out to offer support. The community he had once been a hero in now saw him as nothing more than an accused criminal. The shock of it all gnawed at him like an unrelenting beast. Gloria, his mother, was his only anchor. The two of them had always shared an unbreakable bond, but even her presence couldn't lift the weight of the situation. Every visit to her apartment, every conversation with her, felt like an act of survival. Gloria would try to console him, but even her comforting words felt hollow. "Don't worry, James. We'll get through this. You'll be cleared," she'd say, trying to believe it herself. But there was no escaping the truth that the system had failed him, and in doing so, had made him guilty in the eyes of the world. The guilt of not being able to protect his mother from the public scrutiny hurt the most. Gloria had sacrificed so much for him, and now she was forced to watch as the world turned against her son. The stress had begun to show on her. Her once vibrant face had become lined with worry, and James couldn't bear to see it. Days turned into weeks and weeks into months. Each day, James awoke to the haunting reality of his situation. The accusations had destroyed his life, but worse still, they were preventing him from moving forward. The media relentlessly covered his trial, painting him as a monster before any evidence had even been presented. His name was dragged through the mud, and every day felt like he was being suffocated by the weight of the world. Every night, he sat in the silence of his empty apartment, haunted by the memories of what had been. He replayed his football victories in his mind, the championship games, the thrill of winning, memories that now seemed distant, almost like they belonged to someone else. The accolades he had worked for all his life now felt meaningless. Fame, fortune, and respect had all turned to dust. It felt as if he had been stripped of his identity, and all that remained was the man the world saw now, the accused. And yet, despite it all, James clung to one thought: he was innocent. That belief was the only thing that kept him from completely unraveling. But as the trial approached and the pressure mounted, his resolve began to weaken. Would anyone ever believe him again? Would the truth ever come to light? Or had his life been destroyed forever by a lie? The days grew heavier. James sank deeper into the darkness of despair, isolated in a world that had once adored him but now rejected him without question. He spent long hours staring out the window, wondering how everything had gone so wrong. He had it all: a career, a future, a loving family. And now it was all gone. The cold walls of the prison seemed to close in on James Carter every day, suffocating him with the weight of his wrongful conviction. The world outside had moved on, but James remained trapped in a nightmare that had no end. He was a prisoner of both his surroundings and the false accusations that had stolen his life. The first few days were the hardest, spent in disbelief, his mind constantly replaying the moments leading to his conviction. Every word, every look, every whisper from the media haunted him like a shadow that wouldn't let go. In the beginning, he struggled to adjust to the harsh reality of prison life. The cold steel bars, the constant noise, and the feeling of being reduced to a number were a far cry from the luxury and adoration he had once known. The other inmates eyed him with suspicion, some with resentment and others with awe. To them, he wasn't James Carter, the football star. He was just another inmate, another man locked away behind bars with nothing to set him apart from the rest. At night, the loneliness was almost unbearable. The silence of the cell pressed in on him, and he lay awake, staring at the ceiling, his thoughts racing. What had happened to his life? What had gone wrong? He had worked so hard to make it out of the streets, to build a future, to make his mother proud. And now, everything had been taken from him. His career, his reputation, his freedom, all gone in the blink of an eye, thanks to a lie. But as the days turned into weeks and weeks into months, James began to find a strange sense of peace in the chaos. He couldn't control what had happened to him, but he could control how he responded to it. He began to see prison not as a place of defeat but as an opportunity to rebuild himself. His physical strength had always been his greatest asset, so he threw himself into working out. His muscles grew stronger, his body harder, but it was his mind that needed the most work. Every day James read. Books became his escape, his lifeline. He devoured everything he could, self-help books, history, philosophy. With each page he felt himself growing stronger mentally. He had always been a dedicated athlete, but now he was becoming dedicated to something far more important: his own survival. He wrote letters to his mother, pouring his heart into the pages, telling her that he was okay, that he wasn't broken. In his letters he found comfort, and in his words, a reminder of who he was before the world turned against him. Prison, for all its misery, gave James something he hadn't had in years: time to reflect. He thought about his life, his mistakes, his ambitions, and his family. He thought about Gloria, the woman who had given him everything, and he vowed to make her proud. More than anything, he thought about the truth, about the lie that had stolen everything from him. But there was something else that started to stir inside him as well. It was a quiet, almost imperceptible anger, a fire that refused to be extinguished. He wasn't going to let this define him. He wasn't going to be remembered as the man who had everything and lost it all. He would rise again, and when he did, he would make sure that the truth came out. James had always been a fighter. This was no different. Prison was just another obstacle, another challenge. He was determined to face it head-on, to survive, and one day to clear his name. James had spent nearly 2 years in prison, the weight of the wrongful accusation constantly hanging over him. Each day felt like an endless struggle, and while he had built some semblance of inner peace, the frustration never truly faded. There were moments when he could hardly breathe, when the injustice of it all threatened to suffocate him. The truth seemed so far out of reach, like a distant shore that he couldn't swim toward. His life had been stolen and no one seemed to care. But then, one ordinary Tuesday morning, something changed. It wasn't much, a simple phone call, but it was enough to shift the course of everything. James had just finished his morning workout in the prison yard when the guard called him over. "You've got a visitor," the guard said, handing him a slip of paper with a name written on it: Tasha Williams. Tasha? James racked his brain trying to place the name. He'd heard it before, but he couldn't quite recall the connection. When he arrived at the visitation room, he found Tasha sitting nervously at the table, looking more disheveled than he remembered. She was one of Danielle's old friends, someone who had been in their social circle before everything went wrong. But what was she doing here now? "James," Tasha said softly, her voice trembling. "I have to tell you something." James sat down across from her, his heart pounding. "What is it?" he asked, his voice guarded. Was this some kind of joke? Had she come here to make things worse? "I should have said something sooner," Tasha continued, her hands shaking. "I've been too scared, but I can't live with this guilt anymore. What happened, what Danielle did to you, it was all planned. She lied. Everything she told the police, everything that happened, it was all a setup." James felt like the air had been knocked out of him. "What do you mean, a setup?" he demanded, his voice rising. He couldn't breathe. Was this some kind of cruel game? I wasn't sure at first," Tasha stammered, her eyes filling with tears. "But after you were convicted, Danielle came to me. She told me everything. She planned it all. She said she was going to make you pay for moving on, for having a good life after the divorce. She couldn't stand seeing you happy. She was jealous. She told me she was going to accuse you of something terrible, something no one would question, and that she would make sure you never played football again." James couldn't believe what he was hearing. "She told you this?" he asked, his voice thick with disbelief. "She planned all of this?" Tasha nodded, her face pale. "She said it was easy to make people believe her. She's a great actress. She knew she could destroy you without anyone questioning her." She looked down, ashamed. "I should have said something before, but I was scared. Danielle can be dangerous when she's angry." James's mind raced. Every word Tasha spoke pierced through him like a knife, But they also opened a door he thought would never be unlocked. This was the first real piece of evidence he had that could change everything. Danielle had fabricated the entire accusation, and Tasha had been an unwilling witness to her manipulation. "Why are you telling me this now?" James asked, his voice steady despite the storm of emotions raging inside him. Tasha hesitated before speaking. "Because I can't live with it anymore. I watched you suffer, I saw your life get destroyed, and I did nothing. But now I can't be part of this lie anymore. I have to do something." "I need proof," James said urgently, his heart racing. "Do you have anything that can prove what you're saying? Texts, recordings, anything?" Tasha reached into her bag and pulled out her phone. "I have everything," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. She showed him the messages Danielle had sent her in the days before the accusation, messages outlining the entire plan, the manipulation, the lies. "I also have a recording. I called her a few weeks ago and she admitted everything. She said you deserved what happened to you." James's hands trembled as he looked at the evidence. This was it. This was the breakthrough he had been waiting for. It was the first real chance he had to clear his name, to expose the truth. For the first time in years, James felt a spark of hope. "I'm going to need to take this to my lawyer," James said, his voice calm but filled with determination. "We're going to make sure this gets to the right people." Tasha nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I'm so sorry, James. I should have done this a long time ago." For the first time in years, James felt like he might actually have a chance to reclaim his life. This new evidence was the beginning of the end of his nightmare. But he knew this was just the start. The battle ahead would be long and hard, but now he had something he never thought he would: a chance for justice. James had been through hell and back, but now, standing at the precipice of what could be his redemption, he was faced with the woman who had destroyed everything. Danielle Collins had finally agreed to meet him, after years of silence, after everything she had put him through. The text messages, the phone calls, the lies, they had all led to this moment. He had waited for this chance, prayed for it, and now the time had come to confront her face to face. It was late afternoon when James arrived at the cafe downtown. The air was thick with tension as he pushed open the door, the soft jingle of the bell above the door barely registering in his mind. He glanced around, trying to spot her. Danielle had insisted on meeting in public, in a place where nothing would get out of hand. James knew better. This wasn't about closure. It wasn't about reconciling. It was about confronting the truth once and for all. He spotted her in the corner of the room, sitting at a table near the window. Danielle looked the same, elegant, poised, and impeccably dressed, her beauty still striking despite the years that had passed. But there was something different about her now. The confidence that had once radiated from her seemed forced. There was a tightness around her mouth, a flicker of nervousness in her eyes that James had never seen before. He walked over to her, his steps purposeful, his heart pounding in his chest. He could feel the years of anger, hurt, and betrayal building inside him, but he forced himself to stay calm. He wasn't here to argue or shout. He was here to get the truth. The real truth. "Danielle," James said, his voice steady but laced with the weight of the years he'd spent suffering because of her lies. Danielle looked up, a small, almost sad smile playing on her lips. "James," she said, her voice cool, though there was a noticeable tremor beneath it. "It's been a long time." "It has," James replied, his gaze never leaving hers. "And I've spent that time trying to understand what happened. Why you did what you did." Danielle shifted in her seat, avoiding his gaze for a moment. "James, I'm not here to rehash the past," she said, her tone defensive. "I just thought we could finally have a civil conversation." "A civil conversation?" James repeated, his voice rising slightly, though he kept his composure. "You want a civil conversation after what you did to me? After the lie you told that ruined my life? You expect me to just sit here and pretend everything's fine?" Danielle's face hardened, but there was still a flicker of uncertainty in her eyes. She opened her mouth to speak, but James cut her off. He wasn't going to let her twist the narrative. Not anymore. "I have the proof, Danielle," he said, pulling out his phone. "The text. The recordings. I know everything. I know what you planned, how you manipulated me, how you set me up to take the fall for something I didn't do." Danielle's eyes widened for a split second before she regained her composure. She leaned back in her chair, her lips curling into a faint, almost knowing smile. "You think this is going to change anything, James? You think you can just go around exposing me like that? Do you really believe anyone will believe you? I made sure of it. People like you, they don't get away with this." The coldness in her words sent a chill down James's spine, but he refused to back down. You lied about everything, Danielle. You ruined me because you couldn't stand to see me happy. You couldn't stand to see me move on with my life. But now I'm done. I'm not going to let you keep destroying people just to get what you want." Danielle's smile faltered, but she quickly replaced it with a mask of indifference. "You're wasting your time, James. You can't prove anything. You think you can make people believe you after everything that's happened? It's your word against mine. And I'm not the one who's going to lose in this situation." James's anger flared, but he kept his voice steady. "No, Danielle. This time it's different. I'm not going to let you hide behind your lies any longer. You're going to answer for what you did." He leaned forward, locking eyes with her. "You know what you did. And you know I have the evidence. You may have thought you could control the narrative before, but you're not in charge anymore." Danielle's expression faltered for a brief moment, the confidence slipping from her face. But before James could say anything more, she stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. Her eyes were cold, but there was a hint of something else there, a fear that James hadn't seen before. "You can't do this, James," she said, her voice tight. "You don't know who you're messing with." James stood as well, his heart pounding with a mixture of anger and relief. The truth was finally out in the open, and no matter how much Danielle tried to deny it, he had won. "I know exactly what I'm doing," James said, his voice calm but filled with unwavering determination. "And it's over." Danielle stared at him for a moment, her gaze flickering with something James couldn't quite place. And then, as quickly as she had stood, she turned to leave. But just as she reached the door, James noticed something in her hand. The glint of metal. A gun. The days following the confrontation at the cafe felt like a blur. The gun had been a final, shocking act of desperation on Danielle's part, but it was also the moment everything changed. The police had arrived just in time to prevent any further violence, and they quickly took Danielle into custody. As they led her away, handcuffed and struggling, James felt a strange sense of relief wash over him. This was the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. The weight he had carried for so long was finally starting to lift. However, the fight wasn't over yet. Even though Danielle's actions had exposed her true nature, James knew that the battle for his reputation and freedom was far from finished. The evidence he had, Tasha's recordings, the texts, and the witness statements, was undeniable, but it would take more than just the truth to get his life back. The system was never easy on those who had been wrongfully accused, and James was all too aware that the road ahead would still be full of obstacles. The next few weeks were filled with legal meetings, strategy sessions, and endless paperwork. James's lawyer worked tirelessly to ensure that the case was handled properly, but there was still the matter of his original conviction to address. Danielle's false accusations had taken everything from him. His career, his friends, his public image, and his freedom. Now he was determined to get it all back, and that meant taking down the lie once and for all. The court hearings were intense. Danielle, now facing charges of perjury, attempted murder, and aggravated assault, had finally been forced to admit to her lies. Her once composed demeanor had crumbled. As James sat in the courtroom, he could feel the tension in the air, but it was different this time. For the first time in years, he wasn't the one on trial. He was there as a witness to the truth that would ultimately set him free. Tasha took the stand first. Her testimony was crucial. She was the one who had been there when Danielle had plotted the entire scheme, and she was the one who had the courage to speak up. As Tasha recounted how Danielle had openly confessed to framing James, the courtroom was silent. The recorded phone call where Danielle had admitted to everything was played in full, and the truth was undeniable. Danielle's defense team tried to discredit Tasha, but it was no use. The evidence was overwhelming. And then, when it was time for James to speak, his words carried more weight than any of the lawyer's arguments. He stood tall, his voice clear as he addressed the jury. He talked about the years of pain he had endured, the public humiliation, and the endless nights spent in prison for a crime he didn't commit. But more than that, he spoke about the truth, about how one person's lies had almost ruined his entire life, and how he had refused to let that happen. "I lost everything," James said, his voice steady. "But I never lost who I am. I never lost my belief in the truth. And now the truth is all I need to move forward. I'm here today standing in front of you not as a victim but as a man who has fought for justice. And I'll continue fighting for it no matter what." When the verdict came in, it was a victory not just for James, but for every person who had ever been falsely accused. Danielle was found guilty on all counts, and she was sentenced to 20 years in prison. The weight of the years James had spent locked away, falsely accused, was finally lifted off his shoulders. Justice had been served not just in the courtroom but in his heart. As the court proceedings concluded and the weight of the moment settled in, James felt a rush of emotions. There was relief, yes, but there was also something deeper, something he hadn't expected: peace. He had been through so much, but in the end, the truth had triumphed. He had rebuilt his life, piece by piece, and now he could finally begin to live it again. The first thing he did after the trial was call his mother. Gloria had been there every step of the way, supporting him through the worst of it. He could hear the tears in her voice when she picked up the phone. "It's over, Mama," he said, choking back emotion. "It's finally over." "I knew you'd make it, baby," Gloria replied softly. "I never stopped believing in you." And for the first time in years, James believed in himself again too. James Carter's journey was one of heartbreak, loss, and betrayal, but it was also a story of resilience, redemption, and the power of truth. As he stood at the edge of everything he had worked for, a man who had been falsely accused and stripped of his dignity, he learned something far more important than fame or success: the strength of character. The moral of James's story wasn't just about the lies being exposed or justice being served. It was about how a person could rise from the ashes of their destruction and rebuild themselves from within. The system failed him once, but that failure became the foundation for his true strength. The trials he endured, the years he spent in prison, and the pain of losing everything, all of that had shaped him into a man who could see the truth even when the world tried to deny it. James had learned to live by a simple yet profound truth: what breaks you can also make you. The very thing that had nearly destroyed him, false accusations, became the catalyst for his transformation. It was in the darkest moments, when all seemed lost, that he discovered his true self. No longer driven by fame or the need for validation, James found peace in knowing that the truth, no matter how long it took, would ultimately come to light. For him, the worst thing that had happened to him, the years spent wrongfully imprisoned, the public humiliation, and the destruction of his career, became the best thing that had ever happened. It wasn't the success or the money that mattered anymore. It was the way he used his suffering to help others, the way he chose to forgive instead of harboring bitterness, the way he found purpose in his pain. The message was clear: justice delayed is not always justice denied. While the road to redemption may be long and filled with obstacles, staying true to who you are, standing firm in the face of injustice, is the only way to reclaim your life. And in the end, the truth always finds its way to the surface, no matter how deep it's buried. James Carter didn't just survive his nightmare, he turned it into his purpose. His story wasn't just one of survival, it was a testament to the power of resilience, integrity, and the unyielding strength of the human spirit.